Not every American car was built to last, and some weren't even built to survive. A handful of vehicles were so dangerous, dishonest, or downright disastrous that they were recalled, removed from the market, or essentially banned from existence. These cars weren't just bad, they broke rules, caught fire, endangered lives, or violated laws so egregiously that automakers and regulators had no choice but to shut them down. Here are 9 ultra-banned American cars you won't believe were real and why they were buried in shame.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 9. The 1969 Mercury Marauder X100 was Mercury's ambitious attempt to blend brute V8 power with full-size luxury styling. Positioned as a personal luxury coupe with muscle car muscle, the X100 packed a big block 429 Cobra Jet V8, the same engine found in drag strip terrors like the Torino Cobra. Yet despite its potential, this car never earned the place it deserved in the muscle pantheon. It wasn't just overshadowed by Mustangs and Torinos, it was hamstrung by early pollution regulations, insurance blacklists, and its own enormous size. By 1969, Mercury, Ford's upscale brand, was looking for a slice of the muscle car market. But instead of building a raw street brawler, Mercury gave us something unique. A full-size coupe that shared DNA with the Mercury marquees. Styling cues taken from muscle cars, sloping fastback, concealed headlights, bucket seats, but with a luxury interior, wood grain trim, thick carpets, and quiet ride. This was muscle for the mature buyer, someone who wanted performance and refinement. The Marauder X100's most critical and controversial feature was under the hood. Engine, 429 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8, 7.0 liters. Output, 360 horsepower, gross rating. Torque, 480 pound-foot. Carburetor, 4-barrel. Compression ratio, 10.5 to 1. Transmission, C6 3-speed automatic with heavy-duty components. Rear axle, 3.00 to 1 axle ratio. Performance but still highway capable. This engine gave the X100 serious credibility. It wasn't just a cruiser, it was a land missile that could run with many intermediate-sized muscle cars in a straight line. Despite its mechanical excellence, the X100 became a regulatory victim almost immediately. Several issues hit the car hard in various U.S. states and regions. The 429 CJ was not equipped with emissions controls suitable for new pollution laws emerging in California and parts of the Northeast. States like California began blocking registration of new big block cars unless they had certified emissions equipment. Mercury offered no detuned version of the 429 CJ for stricter regions. The car's size didn't hide its raw power, and insurance companies noticed. The 429 CJ placed the Marauder in Group 5 and 6 insurance tiers, meaning young buyers paid astronomical premiums, if they could even get coverage. As with the 426 Hemi or 454 LS6, many insurers flat out refused to underwrite the Marauder in certain trims. At 9 to 11 miles per gallon, the X100 was notoriously thirsty. Gasoline prices weren't high yet, but buyers in colder or mountainous regions saw the cost-to-performance ratio as unappealing, especially compared to smaller muscle cars. The X100 wasn't just about what was under the hood. It had a striking and rare look. Fastback roofline and tunneled rear window, hidden headlights, quad exhausts, rear blackout panel, and fender skirts. Inside, individual bucket seats, center console, thick trim materials, and available 8-track stereo. Despite its aggressive styling, the X100 weighed around 4,300 pounds, which meant it was quick but never nimble. Only around 5,600 Marauder X100s were built in 1969, with most buyers opting for lesser 390 or 429 engines. Fewer still were ordered with performance options like limited slip rear ends or dual exhaust. California and emission states heavily restricted the sale or registration of 429 CJ models. Today, surviving examples are exceedingly rare, especially in original, unmodified condition. The Mercury Marauder X100 429 CJ fell between categories. Too luxurious and heavy to be a street racer, too powerful and aggressive for most full-size buyers. It was quietly dropped after 1970, and Mercury returned to more conservative luxury offerings. But for enthusiasts, it remains an underrated gem, a muscle coupe in a luxury wrapper, and one of the last big block Mercurys with real bite. The 1969 Mercury Marauder X100 429 Cobra Jet was a bold experiment, a last gasp of full-size muscle before regulation and insurance strangled the segment. Its performance credentials were real, but came at a cost few were willing to bear. In regions like California, it was effectively unregisterable due to emissions noncompliance. Its downfall was not mechanical failure, but rather bureaucratic strangulation. Today, it stands as a symbol of the brief, glorious era when you could buy a plush, full-size coupe with drag strip power, if only the law would let you. Number 8. The Pontiac Ventura 2 was born out of GM's badge engineering strategy. Underneath, it was essentially a Chevrolet Nova, sharing the X-body platform. But Pontiac tried to give it a distinct identity by infusing it with brand-specific styling and performance flair. The Sprint trim, particularly when equipped with the 350 HO V8, was supposed to offer a compact alternative to big, thirsty muscle cars. It aimed to give younger buyers an affordable slice of V8 performance in a smaller, more efficient package. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The early 1970s saw a convergence of pressures that would spell doom for many performance cars. Stricter emissions regulations, especially in California and the Northeast. Insurance premiums that punished young buyers and big engines. Fuel economy awareness growing before the 1973 oil crisis even hit. Pontiac's effort to give the Ventura 2 a high-output variant with the Sprint 350 HO engine was noble, but ultimately futile in this climate. Let's look under the hood. Engine: 350 cubic inch V8, 5.7 liters. Output: approximately 175 to 200 horsepower, net depending on source and tune. Compression: lowered to meet emissions, likely around 8.2 to 1. Carburation: 4-barrel Rochester. Exit: dual with cross-flow mufflers on higher trims. Transmission options: 3-speed manual, 4-speed manual, or 3-speed turbo hydromatic auto. Rear axle ratios: performance-geared optional packages. Despite the high output label, the 350 HO was already down on power compared to earlier iterations due to new emissions tuning, smog pumps, and timing retardation. The 1972 Ventura 2 Sprint was not flamboyant like the Firebird or GTO. Instead, it was a compact two-door coupe or hatchback, with Sprint badging, subtle striping, rally wheels, and dual exhausts. It was meant to be sporty but affordable, a muscle car for someone who couldn't quite afford the GTO or Firebird Trans Am. Here's where the trouble started. California had stricter smog laws than other states by 1972. The Sprint's 350 HO failed to meet these regulations without significant detuning. Rather than re-engineer a compliant version, Pontiac quietly excluded the Hi-O model from California and other emission-restricted zones. Because of its limited geographic availability, Pontiac didn't market the Sprint 350 HO aggressively. Brochures mention it, but dealer availability was spotty, and many dealers didn't order them. Buyers in California often had no idea the trim existed. The Ventura 2 Sprint with the 350 HO sold in tiny numbers. Most Ventura buyers went for 6-cylinder models or base V8s for economy, luxury trim, custom, or GTO Light versions later on. Due to poor visibility, emissions issues, and mild performance, the Sprint 350ho was dropped by 1973, replaced by more compliant but less interesting versions. The Ventura line itself was absorbed into the GTO experiment briefly, 1974, before fading entirely. Today, the 1972 Ventura 2 Sprint with the 350ho is nearly extinct, lacked the fanfare of the GTO or Firebird, was overshadowed by Chevy's Nova SS, which offered better factory support and performance image, suffered from its own anonymity. Even Pontiac collectors often forget it existed. But it represents an important era, when GM divisions were trying to keep the muscle alive in a changing world. It was a last gasp of performance tuning before emission strangulation fully kicked in. The 1972 Pontiac Ventura 2 Sprint 350ho is a textbook example of a car that could have been great. It had the right formula, small size, V8 power, sporty trim. But it arrived just as government regulators, insurance companies, and market shifts collided. Rather than revise and save it, Pontiac let it die quietly, and today it remains a ghost of muscle car history. A badge-engineered, depowered reminder of when muscle faded into memory.
Number 7. When Chevrolet introduced the Monte Carlo in 1970, it wasn't just trying to compete with personal luxury coupes like the Ford Thunderbird or Pontiac Grand Prix. Chevy wanted to blend elegance with raw performance, and the result was the surprisingly fierce Monte Carlo SS 454. This wasn't just a trim package. It packed Chevy's biggest and baddest engine, the LS5 454 cubic inch big block V8. Wrapped in long hood styling with restrained chrome and comfort options, it aimed to be the gentleman's muscle car. But this combination of power, size, and noise also made it a target for regulators and municipalities, especially as the 1970s dawned with new rules on vehicle emissions, decibel levels, and weight-to-pollution ratios. The Monte Carlo was new in 1970, built on a stretched version of the Chevelle platform. Design: long hood, short deck, Coke bottle curves. Interior: wood grain dash, optional buckets, and comfort touches. Trim levels: base Monte Carlo or the range-topping SS 454. The SS 454 was Chevrolet's way of saying, yes, this is a luxury coupe, but it can still melt tires. Displacement: 454 cubic inch, 7.4 liter. Horsepower: 360 horsepower gross. Torque: 500 pound-feet. Carburetor: Quadrajet 4-barrel. 0 to 60 miles per second, around 6.5 seconds, incredible for a 4,000+ pound car. Turbo Hydromatic 400 transmission, standard. 12-bolt rear axle with limited slip differential. Heavy-duty suspension. Power front disc brakes. SS badging and hood pins. It was a muscle car in a tuxedo, capable of running with Chevelles and GTOs, but in a more refined wrapper. Despite its success on the showroom floor, the Monte Carlo SS 454 hit legal and regional snags that stunted its long-term growth. The LS5 454 engine, even with stock exhaust, was loud, especially at startup and under throttle. Several urban municipalities and suburban counties, particularly in places like California, New York, and parts of New Jersey, had recently enacted maximum vehicle decibel laws. This made the SS 454 unregisterable or ticket-prone in certain areas without muffler modification. Though the Monte Carlo was technically a mid-sized coupe, it weighed over 4,000 pounds when equipped with the SS 454. Early pollution balancing regulations in several states, particularly California, began focusing on the relationship between gross vehicle weight and emissions output. The SS 554's big motor struggled to meet even the early 1970 pre-catalytic converter standards, especially in NOx and unburned hydrocarbon emissions. In some states, dealers were discouraged or outright blocked from ordering SS 454s unless buyers signed waivers or the cars were modified to meet local rules.
Like many big block muscle cars of the era, the Monte Carlo SS 454 was a nightmare to insure. High premiums, coupled with its performance image, made it increasingly difficult for younger buyers to justify or afford, a critical blow in the face of rising ownership costs. Despite these hurdles, the 1970 Monte Carlo SS 454 sold about 3,823 units, respectable for a premium niche performance model. But Chevrolet discontinued the SS 454 package after 1971, replacing it with smaller engine options and less aggressive packages. Later Monte Carlos would embrace luxury and personal style, not raw performance. The Monte Carlo SS name wouldn't return in earnest until the 1980s, and even then with dramatically less power. Today, the 1970 Monte Carlo SS 454 is a rarity and a collector's gem. It's the only first-generation Monte Carlo SS to feature the full LS5 big block package. Surviving examples are prized, especially if they retain original equipment and build sheets. The car is often overshadowed by Chevelles and Camaros, but represents a unique chapter in Chevrolet's performance history. The 1970 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS 454 represents a transitional moment, the tail end of the muscle car era, the early rumblings of emissions and safety regulations, a time when manufacturers were still trying to combine brute force with civility, only to be told by lawmakers and insurance companies, you can't have both. For one brief moment, Chevy built a luxury car with muscle that could stand tall among the street racers, but the law, the system, and the times conspired to shut it down before it could grow.
Number 6. By 1974, the golden age of American muscle was already on its last legs. Insurance surcharges, federal safety mandates, and tightening emissions regulations were taking their toll. Yet Dodge, never one to go quietly, soldiered on by combining old-school V8 power with upscale trim and road presence in one final, brawny package: the 1974 Dodge Charger SE 440 Magnum. The SE Special Edition trim brought luxury flair, while the 440 Magnum engine, one of Chrysler's legendary big blocks, delivered the kind of brutal torque muscle car fans craved. Unfortunately, the very thing that made this Charger great, its monstrous 440, also doomed it. The 1974 Charger got a revised front and rear to meet new federal 5-mile-per-hour crash bumper standards. The SE trim added opera windows, vinyl roof, plush cloth or vinyl seating, simulated wood grain interior. It looked more like a luxury cruiser than a street brawler, but don't be fooled. Available power plants included the 318, 360, 400, and 440 V8s. Top of the line was the 440 Magnum, also called the 440 High Performance, packing 275 net horsepower, down from earlier gross ratings, 375 pounds-feet of torque, 4-barrel carburetor, heavy-duty cooling and suspension. While the 440 Magnum was still a beast on paper, emissions regulations were tightening rapidly by 1974, particularly in states like California, New York, and parts of the Midwest. Chrysler originally certified the 440 Magnum for all 50 states, but a mid-year revision to federal EPA and California Air Resources Board (CARB) rules meant the engine no longer met compliance without additional emissions controls. Dodge halted shipments of 440-equipped SE Chargers to major markets after spring 1974. Some dealers removed the 440 Magnum option entirely from order forms due to the risk of registration blocks. Chrysler struggled with retrofitting exhaust gas recirculation and other emissions tech onto the high-compression big blocks. The 440 was inherently dirty. Powerful, yes, but too polluting for cities tightening the screws on smog output. The Charger SE 440 Magnum was technically street legal, but couldn't be sold or registered in key high-volume states after mid-1974. Dealers in California, for instance, were forced to steer customers toward lower output 400 or 360 V8s. As a result, production of the SE with the 440 Magnum dropped sharply. Today, the 1974 Charger SE 440 Magnum is a rarity, especially in original, emissions-compliant form. It's remembered for several reasons. It represents one of the last full-sized Mopars to offer the 440 Magnum in a semi-luxury trim. It is a transition car, bridging the raw muscle of the late 60s with the padded roof, emissions-choked cruisers of the late 70s. Survivors are scarce, especially in California legal spec. Cars with original documentation proving factory 440 Magnum installation command a premium. Enthusiasts love its dual identity, luxury on the outside, brute force under the hood. The 1974 Dodge Charger SE 440 Magnum was never banned outright, but it was effectively regulated out of existence. With rising fuel prices, choking emission standards, and a changing public mood, cars like the SE 440 Magnum were dinosaurs in a world already turning to economy and efficiency. It was a last gasp, Dodge's final middle finger to the smog era, and for those lucky enough to drive or preserve one, a rolling tribute to a time when muscle could still wear a tuxedo, even if the EPA didn't like it.
Number 5. By 1971, the American muscle car was staggering under the weight of government regulations, insurance hikes, and shifting market demand. But Oldsmobile, known for combining engineering innovation with performance, still had one last serious contender in its arsenal, the 1971 442 W30 Convertible. This wasn't just a sporty variant. The W30 was Oldsmobile's ultimate performance package, and when fitted to a convertible, it became one of the rarest and most powerful drop tops ever built by General Motors. But that power came at a price, both literally and legally. By 1971, the 442 name no longer indicated 4-barrel, 4-speed, dual exhaust as it did in its 1960s origins, but it still carried muscle car weight. The W30 was the top-tier performance upgrade. 455 cubic inch V8 L77 W30 engine. Factory rated at 350 gross horsepower, though actual output was closer to 370 plus. Fiberglass hood with functional scoops, special aluminum intake manifold, high lift camshaft, low restriction exhaust, available Muncie 4-speed or Turbo 400 automatic, 3.42 or 3.91 posi traction rear axles. This car could easily run the quarter mile in the low 14-second range, astonishing for a heavy, luxury-equipped convertible. Only 110 W30 convertibles were produced in 1971, making it one of the rarest GM performance convertibles ever built. It was also the last year Oldsmobile offered the W30 on a ragtop. Why so few? The 1971 W30 convertible faced several headwinds. Crash safety failures. With no structural roof, the convertible version of the A-body platform struggled to meet new NHTSA crash test requirements. Specifically, side impact and rollover protection was weak. Some states, especially California and New York, imposed temporary registration bans or dealer restrictions on certain high-powered convertibles like the W30. Excessive noise output. The W30's low-restriction dual exhaust, combined with the open-top layout, triggered state-level noise ordinances in high-density urban areas. Police and local DMV authorities began flagging these cars for exceeding decibel limits, particularly in metropolitan zones. Insurance blacklisting. The 442 W30 was considered nearly uninsurable in some zip codes. Many insurers outright refused to cover W30 convertibles due to their high-performance nature and perceived safety deficiencies. After 1971, Oldsmobile discontinued the W30 convertible due to lower demand, rising regulatory hurdles, GM's own shifting corporate policy away from high-performance packages. By 1972, horsepower ratings were quoted in net figures instead of gross, which made engines look weaker on paper. Insurance, emissions, and noise rules effectively killed the entire breed. One of the most collectible Oldsmobiles ever, especially with factory build sheets and documentation. Restored W30 convertibles can fetch over $200,000 at auction depending on options and originality. Represents the final defiant shout of the muscle car era, a powerful, unapologetic convertible produced when regulators were closing in fast. The 1971 Oldsmobile 442 W30 convertible was a victim of its own excellence. Too loud, too fast, too wild, and ultimately too controversial for the changing automotive landscape. It stands as a muscle car icon, not just for its performance, but for what it represents. The last time you could walk into a dealership and drive off in a factory-built convertible with a fire-breathing big block V8 under the hood, before regulations pulled the plug on that dream.
Number 4. By the mid-1960s, drag racing had exploded across America, and Chrysler was at the forefront. The Hemi engine was already feared on the track, but Dodge wanted to take it further. Build a no-frills, lightweight Coronet for superstock competition, with just enough legal paperwork to call it streetable. The result was the 1966 Dodge Coronet W023, a model so extreme that it blurred the line between a production car and a factory race car. While technically street legal, some states, especially California, outright refused to title or register them for public roads. The W023 wasn't a trim, it was a production code designating a factory-built superstock drag racer. Designed specifically for NHRA Superstock, SSB, and match racing. Built in very low numbers, fewer than 55 were made in 1966. These cars went directly to race teams, select dealers, or hardcore enthusiasts who knew exactly what they were buying. Under the hood sat the infamous 426 cubic inch race Hemi, a brutal high-compression version that made 425 horsepower on paper, though real output was closer to 500 plus HP. Dual Carter AFB 4-barrel carbs, 10.25 to 1 compression ratio, cross-bolted mains, solid lifters, factory long tube headers in the trunk for installation, mated to either a heavy-duty A833 4-speed or TorqueFlite 727 automatic, 4.56 or 4.88 sure grip rear axle, track ready. This wasn't just a muscle car, it was a track weapon with plates. To maximize quarter-mile performance, Dodge stripped the W023 of anything remotely luxurious. No undercoating, no sound deadening, no rear seat, no carpeting, no armrests, thin-gauge glass, sometimes plexiglass, fiberglass hood with a massive scoop, optional aluminum front bumpers and fenders, bare-bones vinyl bench seat, minimal dash cluster, no radio, no heater, no insulation. Basically a bare shell around a monster drivetrain. The goal, keep weight under 3,200 pounds. Incredible for a mid-sized car with a big block V8. Though Dodge provided VINs and titles, the W023 raised eyebrows and objections in several states. Straight-through exhausts with minimal muffling violated many local ordinances, especially in urban areas. Pre-EPA era, but still subject to state-level inspection. Some jurisdictions flagged the absence of a PCV system or required exhaust modifications. Lack of basic equipment, no defroster, no wipers, or non-functional, no side mirrors in some cases, no seat belts in early builds, registration refusals. States like California, New York, and New Jersey were known to deny registration for the W023 unless it was modified. Some were never even titled for street use.
These cars were devastating in NHRA superstock, running 11-second quarter miles out of the box, or better with tuning. Legendary names like Dick Landy, Ronnie Sox, and Dandy Dick Smith piloted similar factory Mopar drag cars in SSB competition, helping build the legend of Dodge's factory race programs. Today, the 1966 W023 Coronet is a holy grail for Mopar collectors. Only a few dozen built. Most were raced and destroyed. Survivors, especially with matching numbers, fetch well over $200,000 in top condition. Many are displayed in museums or historic racing events. Preceded the Copo movement from GM, set the template for all future factory drag cars like the Dodge Demon 170 or Mustang Cobra Jet, proved that the line between race car and street car could be dangerously thin. The 1966 Dodge Coronet W03 Hemi represents a brief, glorious moment in muscle car history, when automakers openly built drag cars and dared to pretend they were street machines. While it wore a license plate and a VIN, the W023 was never really meant for public roads, and regulators knew it. It stands today as a raw, uncompromising expression of factory performance, and a reminder of the era before the rules caught up with the speed.
Number 3. By 1980, traditional American muscle cars were shadows of their former selves. The oil crisis, insurance crackdowns, and especially federal and state emissions regulations had pushed big V8s into extinction or made them a joke. Pontiac, once the home of the GTO and Firebird, tried to resurrect some performance credibility through forced induction. Enter the Grand Prix SJ Turbo, a vehicle that sounded aggressive on paper but struggled in the real world, especially in emission-regulated regions like California and Colorado. The SJ was Pontiac's upscale sporty trim level within the Grand Prix lineup. The 1980 Grand Prix SJ Turbo attempted to blend luxury and performance by adding a turbocharged 301 cubic inch V8, the same one that had recently appeared in the Trans Am. Available turbo 4.9-liter V8, 301 CI. Garrett TB3050 turbocharger. Electronic feedback 4-barrel carburetor. 170 to 180 horsepower, depending on state and altitude. Paired with a THM 350 automatic transmission. Offered dual exhausts, bucket seats, rally gauges, and SJ badging. On the surface, it looked like a premium performance car ready to reclaim lost muscle car glory, just with modern emission tech. While the idea of a turbocharged Grand Prix was compelling, the application was flawed. Turbo lag was significant, especially paired with a 3-speed automatic. The carbureted turbo setup was temperamental, especially under varying temperatures or altitudes. Despite the turbo, acceleration wasn't impressive, mid-17s in the quarter mile and 0 to 60 in over 9 seconds. The Grand Prix G-body chassis was soft and floaty. Power was routed through a standard automatic with no manual option. Brake and suspension upgrades were minimal. In short, the SJ Turbo had performance aspirations, but it was more sizzle than steak. The Turbo 301 V8, with its feedback carb and primitive emissions controls, struggled to meet increasingly strict emissions regulations, particularly in the California Air Resources Board, CARB, required stricter NOx and hydrocarbon controls. The 301 Turbo's calibration and tuning couldn't pass without major redesign. Pontiac withdrew the model from sale in California for 1980. The Turbo's performance suffered significantly in high elevations. Emission equipment, especially the carburetor's air-fuel mixture, malfunctioned or ran too rich, leading to failed emissions tests. In some areas, buyers were required to down-tune the engine or swap components to pass inspection, or were denied registration altogether.
As a result, Pontiac limited sales of the Grand Prix SJ Turbo to low-altitude, low-regulation states, effectively banning it in key markets. The Grand Prix SJ Turbo was offered for just 1 year. Fewer than 5,000 units were produced. Many were unsold or rerouted to other states due to compliance problems. Buyers were confused. Was it a muscle car, a luxury coupe, a technical experiment? Critics noted the car's heavy weight, vague handling, and disappointing performance. Buyers found the turbo engine unreliable and difficult to service. By 1981, Pontiac dropped the turbo from the Grand Prix entirely. Today, the 1980 Grand Prix SJ Turbo is a forgotten relic of a strange moment in automotive history. It was one of the first American turbocharged production coupes, predating the Buick Regal Grand National. But it suffered from rushed engineering, regulatory headwinds, and confused brand messaging. The emissions bans in California and other regions sealed its fate, reducing production numbers and further dooming it to obscurity. Still, it laid some groundwork for the turbo resurgence later in the decade, but the Buick GNX did it better. The 1980 Pontiac Grand Prix SJ Turbo was too little, too late, and too complicated for its time. It arrived at an era when regulators, not racers, were calling the shots, and the turbo setup simply couldn't keep up with what the laws demanded. While technically intriguing and historically important, it remains an example of how technology and regulation collided, leaving a potentially interesting vehicle stranded in the middle.
Number 2. By 1972, the American muscle car was under siege. Rising insurance rates, fuel prices, and most critically, new federal emissions and safety regulations were suffocating performance. That year marked a transition to net horsepower ratings, which suddenly made once mighty engines look neutered. In this environment, Mercury's Montego GT 429 landed with a thud. A big, overpowered, and mismatched coupe that was as obsolete as it was intriguing. The Montego GT was Mercury's attempt at a performance-oriented version of its mid-size Montego lineup, which was a cousin to the Ford Torino. The GT trim added unique stripes and trim, rally wheels and suspension upgrades, bucket seats and center console options, and, for 1 year only, an available 429 cubic inch V8. This 429 was the Thunderjet Big Block, rated at 208 to 224 net horsepower, down from gross 360-plus numbers in earlier years. It was Mercury's biggest engine in its smallest coupe, aimed at reviving the excitement of the late 1960s performance era. It was rare, expensive, and hard to justify in a world pivoting toward economy and emissions compliance. The 429 V8 was a relic of the glory days. Large displacement, high torque, but suddenly inefficient and dirty under 1972 standards. Displacement, 429 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Horsepower, net, 208 to 224 HP. Torque, some 340 to 370 pound-feet. Carburetor, 4-barrel motorcraft. Transmission, C6 3-speed automatic only. While still capable of strong straight-line speed, the weight of the car and detuned emissions-compliant tuning dulled performance. It could still sprint 0 to 60 in under 8.5 seconds, not bad, but it drank premium fuel and belched hydrocarbons like a factory. Tailpipe emission standards, especially in states like California and New York, noise limits, and fuel economy reporting. The Montego GT 429 immediately hit walls. The 429 could not meet NOx and unburned hydrocarbon limits without significant detuning or add-on equipment. Ford chose not to re-engineer the car. Result: banned from sale in California and other states adopting similar standards. At just 9 to 12 mpg, the 429 Montego couldn't compete with the emerging 302 and 351 small block alternatives. Ford's own dealers had trouble selling the 429 GT to a public worried about fuel costs. Insurance companies penalized any car with a big block V8 and GT trim. In some urban areas, local governments and inspectors refused registration due to emissions failures or lack of parts availability for tuning. The Montego GT 429 was built only for the 1972 model year. Ford never advertised it heavily and existed mostly as a dealer option. Fewer than 1,000 are believed to have been made, with some sources citing even lower numbers due to mid-year option deletions. By 1973, the 429 was dropped entirely from the Montego line. The GT trim was downgraded and repositioned more as a visual package than a performance one. Ford pivoted toward personal luxury coupes like the Thunderbird and eventual Cougar XR7, leaving muscle behind. Today, the 1972 Mercury Montego GT 429 is extremely rare, often confused with lesser Montego GTs or standard V8 Montegos. Sought by collectors who value obscure muscle variants, but often overshadowed by more famous Fords like the Torino Cobra or Mustang Mach-1. Notably absent from performance car histories because it arrived a year too late to matter and was quietly killed by emissions law. The 1972 Montego GT 429 represents one of the last confused attempts to hang on to big block performance in a regulatory storm. It was too thirsty, too polluting, and too late, arriving at a moment when the American car market had already begun retreating from performance in favor of compliance. It wasn't just banned by law, it was rejected by the market, regulators, and Ford's own product planners.
Number 1. After the 1970s oil crises, American automakers scrambled to improve fuel economy. Diesels, popular in Europe and proven in trucks, looked like the answer. General Motors was one of the first U.S. manufacturers to offer diesel options across its passenger car lineup, including in mid-size vehicles like the 1982 Buick Century Limited. But the execution was deeply flawed, leading to emissions failures, engine breakdowns, and regional bans that doomed the entire experiment. The Buick Century Limited was marketed as a comfortable, near-luxury sedan, part of GM's mid-size A-body lineup shared with the Chevy Celebrity, Pontiac 6000, and Olds Cutlass Sierra. In 1982, the diesel engine option was introduced as a premium upgrade, aimed at fuel-conscious drivers, long-distance commuters, and environmentally concerned consumers. But instead of innovation, Buick offered a recipe for disaster. Under the hood was the Oldsmobile-built 4.3-liter diesel V6, a derivative of GM's problematic diesel V8. Displacement, 4.3-liter, 262 cubic inch. Output, some 85 horsepower. Torque, 165 pound-foot. Fuel economy, advertised at 25 to 30 mpg. Fuel system, indirect injection, naturally aspirated. Compression ratio, some 22.5 to 1. Despite the promising MPG, the engine was prone to catastrophic mechanical failures, fuel system contamination, and cold start issues, especially in winter or at high altitude. The 1982 Buick Century Diesel was not just a bad car, it was blacklisted in multiple states and became the subject of class action lawsuits and widespread recalls. Here's why. The diesel engine lacked modern particulate filters. High emissions of NOx, soot, and unburned hydrocarbons failed to meet standards in New York, California, Colorado, and other states. Many regions refused registration renewals or required costly retrofits, which GM didn't offer. The 4.3-liter diesel was plagued with head gasket failures, cracked blocks, warped heads, injector pump malfunctions. Poor metallurgy and weak head bolt designs meant most engines failed before 60,000 miles. Most Buick dealers were not trained to service diesel engines. Parts shortages, misdiagnoses, and warranty delays frustrated owners. GM denied many claims, blaming improper maintenance despite systemic design flaws. By mid-1982, environmental and transportation agencies in New York, Colorado, Massachusetts, Nevada, and California, informally, had effectively discouraged or blocked registrations of diesel Buicks due to failed emissions inspections, excessive visible smoke output, safety concerns over engine stallouts in cold climates. In some cases, insurance premiums were also raised for diesel cars due to increased fire risk from leaky injectors and fuel pumps. The Century diesel was a commercial failure. Sales were less than 5% of total Century production in 1982. Buyers who did choose diesel models, traded them in early, often at a loss, joined lawsuits demanding compensation, or simply scrapped them after failed inspections. By 1985, GM had pulled almost all diesel engines from passenger cars. The 1982 Buick Century Limited diesel is a cautionary tale in automotive history. It wasn't just a failed engine, it helped kill American consumer confidence in diesel cars for decades. Diesel car sales in the U.S. never recovered. GM's reputation for quality and engineering took a long-term hit. Most diesel Century models were crushed by the late 1980s. Clean survivors are almost non-existent today. The 1982 Buick Century diesel wasn't banned outright nationwide, but it might as well have been. With state-level restrictions, failed emissions tests, recalls, and technical blacklisting, it became unsellable and unserviceable. It stands as one of GM's most infamous engineering missteps and a reminder that bad technology, rushed to market, will always be punished, either by regulators, mechanics, or the public.